Hello, everyone. It is October, and we are going to once again conduct our CAR-PGA virtual panel. I'm very excited to speak to our guest, who we will speak to in a moment. But before we do that, we have a couple of housekeeping things. I'm your host, Mike Tresca. I'm committee chair, and we do this monthly. We took a break for the summer. We're back as of September, and now we're in October. And we are planning guests all through the end of the year and into next year. So very excited to keep this going. I think hopefully you find it valuable. We find it valuable. It certainly gets the word out. And we're always excited to meet new people and hear their stories about gaming and how they further the hobby and particularly in education in the world in general. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to address before we dive into our interview. The first is that YouTube handles are coming. I got this note recently, and as you know, we are continuing to try and get our YouTube channel more publicity so that we can get a short link, which makes it easier to find, partially because we're competing with the PGA because we have CAR-PGA in our name. So it'll be great to have our own. Well, they recently released YouTube handles, which sounds like short links similar along the same lines of what you get if you get to 50 or 100. I don't remember exactly subscriptions. So hopefully we will have more news as that progresses. And I will, of course, certainly put it in the newsletter so everybody gets their chance to use it or be aware of it as it comes about. So once I know more, I will share more. The other thing is I'd like to, speaking of our members and our the CAR-PGA sort of housekeeping, we have 3 folks who have recently joined in the past month. So I want to make sure I am not remiss in welcoming each of them. I'll start with the first one, just frankly, and I think it's date order. Liz Brown. I don't know if Liz listed anything. I don't think Liz did. So welcome, Liz. Douglas Gardner, who is an English teacher, runs a high school club, plays D&D, 5e Mouse Guard, and Torg, which is very exciting. Always love to have teachers. And Andy Haviland, who works in radio, TV, film, and communication studies, which is very exciting. Plays D&D, Star Wars, Robotech, and Marvel superheroes. So welcome to all 3 of our new members. If you are a member, and certainly if you hear your name on this recording, it means that you'll get our newsletter. So you're in our list. That's sort of how you know you're a member. So welcome to those 3. And then the biggest news that came out is the Dungeons and Dragons documentary. So you may recall that there has been a Dungeons and Dragons documentary. There's been a few. Way back when, over 10 years ago, I think at this point, there was the original D&D documentary that had started. It was one of the earlier ones. John Peterson was involved. Tim Kask was involved. I know because I met them at GenCon when we talked about this. I was obviously involved. And I think all of us were probably interviewed at one point in time. So the good news is that is back. It was launched as a Kickstarter. And that documentary is now being purchased officially by Hasbro. So Hasbro has picked it up, and they are launching this really exciting sort of new, I hope, reinvigorated documentary that is going to presumably build on the original. I have no illusions that it will be the same. It's going to be released for D&D's anniversary next year. So it'll be a big deal, but the principals are involved. So I am talking to them. That's Anthony Savini and Cecily Tyler. So they know me and I know them. I mean, I know some of the Hasbro team anyway, but we'll see. We've offered to help and support best we can, particularly because it's very near and dear to our hearts and we want to see that be successful. So here's hoping to hear more. And as I learn more, I will certainly share more. Okay, enough on the housekeeping front. I think I can unpin myself. And hello, Christine. How are you?
Hello. Doing well, thank you.
Christine, I didn't do my homework. Is it Resotko?
Resotko.
Resotko. Okay, that's good. So my confession is in my day job, I do new hire orientation for everybody in my company. And it's a lot of people. And the fear of getting people's names wrong gets stripped away when you have to talk to about 50 to 70 of them internationally in the span of about 10 minutes. So I ask each of them to introduce themselves, and they usually rate me on my Long Island / Northeastern accent as I try to come up with the appropriate pronunciation. So I'm glad I got it right, is the long version of that. Thank you for joining and being so tolerant as you went through all this housekeeping here. And by the way, if you see
Oh.
my tapestry moving, it's because my cat. What are you doing? There's
I'm waiting
stuff
for my
going-
cat to come in.
Yeah,
I
yes.
figured mine's going to come in at some point. So.
Loki and Freya have at various times decided to make a debut, but Freya was just like, you know what, I'm going to mess with your video in the middle of this thing. So anyway, we're excited to have you. You were actually recommended, I believe, by David Millions, one of our board members. And so, what I do is I certainly I know a lot of folks, I go out, but we always welcome members to sort of make recommendations and see who's interested and willing to talk to us, which is always exciting. So the way we normally do these, if you've seen any of these before, and for our viewers and members who have, we usually start with sort of how you got into role playing. And then you've done so much, there's so many things we can talk about, but maybe we'll start there. And see where that takes us. So if you'd like to share sort of your journey, we'd love to hear it.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Christine Resotko. My first introduction to role-playing games was actually back in the dark days of the 80s with the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. That's what sort of introduced me to the concept and went, hey, wait, this is a game. I want to find out about this game. So I'm, of course, in elementary school, find out about all this from, neighbors and stuff, and was all ready to start playing. And my mom's like, she'd bought into the Satanic Panic thing. So it was like, okay, I guess I can't play that right now. Fast forward to college, and I get to my freshman year of college, and I'm on the honors floor at MSU. And half the floor plays role-playing games. So I learned 4 different role-playing games in my first year of college. I learned AD&D, first edition Shadowrun, RuneQuest, and Champions. So, and it just kind of spiraled from there. And 4 years later, I was running Earthdawn games at FASA satellite booth at GenCon in Milwaukee. I now have, this is the geek room. So we have 40 plus game systems in physical format, plus my humble bundle of holding problems. So the PDFs I'm up to 2 USB drives full of stuff, and there's still more on my DriveThruRPG account. I mean, it's a little bananas. And now I'm 8 years into the role-playing game club that I started with the library system I work with. And that was after 2 years of pestering my boss, going, this would be really great, and pulling up articles about bars and stuff that were doing game nights and board game nights and expanding them to D&D. And I went, but wouldn't this be a great safe place to do this and get people together, that they wouldn't be like, there's alcohol and smoking and all of this, and
right,
and you can bring your kids and it's okay. And that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's amazing. It's interesting because one of the things we tried to do for me, and I haven't done it successfully, I ended up saying basically, first of all, COVID happened, so that sort of blew up a lot of our plans. But prior to that, I ended up saying, well, maybe my own basement's better. But it was actually really not feasible for our local libraries to host, because there was a pretty significant fee to sort of reserve rooms, and it just wasn't really support, because they weren't really for gaming. It was more like, like you were a lecturer or something. The most economical was Panera Bread was where we ended up, because they sort of had like a pretty loose policy. I talked to the management, and they were like, if you like buy a drink, that's fine. Like, and they had tables that were sort of game friendly, because they weren't just, so it's just fascinating, to get that magical combination of, you need seats, you need a clean place to sit. Obviously, you don't want to have people gawking at you in a way that's going to be disruptive. But you also want to be able to stay for a period of time, and gaming is not, especially role-playing games, it's not a quick thing. It's not a board game sometimes, although board games at this point can go for hours. So I think it's an interesting combination that is uniquely suited for libraries. So can you talk a little bit about, like, what was the resistance to getting them in there?
Well, the initial way it started, after 2 years of pestering my boss and going, really, this is a great idea, she went, fine, we'll do it. You've got 2 months to get ready. Oh, and you have no budget. I'm like, okay, we don't have we have a couple books that are 4th edition D&D, and they're not even the main rule system. main rule books. So what am I going to do? Well, I have game books, but we need something for people to check out. So I started writing game companies and basically sent this form letter saying, "Hi, I'm from the library and I'm starting this. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to donate some materials." And I was very polite and basically said, any physical game books would get added to our system. They'd be cataloged so people could check them out and look at them. And anything else they sent would be used as materials for our programs, or giveaways too, if they sent any swag or anything like that. And within a month, I had something like $400 worth of books and stuff.
Wow.
Just showing up. It was like Christmas. And my boss is like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "It's stuff." And I started it out with teens, and I think we had 2 or 3 people the first time, and they told their friends, and they told their friends, and we ended up with like a core group of 6 for a while. And then I introduced the head librarian for another branch. Our system has 13, it's capital area district libraries in Michigan. And I introduced one of the branch heads to role-playing games. She'd never tried it before. She loved it. She started an adult group, which I helped her with. So then we expanded to 2 branches, and then other branches got in on it. And prior to COVID, we were just about to have 6 out of our branches having some kind of role-playing game program regularly run by people in our system. There really wasn't a lot of resistance per se to the actual program. We had parents that were very eager to send their kids. And if they had questions, I was always like, if you want to come and see what they're doing and sit down and just go, "Okay, they're being really goofy. Okay, that's all they're doing. All right, fine." I encouraged them to come and see what it's all about. And, that I was running it. I was keeping everything age appropriate so that, if you can't rely on the library to have that kind of thing and be a safe place,
Right.
You shouldn't be running the kind of program.
Right.
And we had a lot of fun over the years. I have now run games for kids as young as 7, and I have a retiree who's in her 70s who comes to some of my programs now. So I did a Ewok Adventures, and I had 2 parents stay to see what was going on, and it was the funniest game session ever. The kids are going bonkers. The parents are over off to the side laughing hysterically at what's going on. I think the only real resistance is trying to explain to librarians who they've got these degrees. I am not actually a librarian. I am a library assistant because I do not have a library degree. But I work with all these people with library degrees, and they're going, "But you don't know anything about cataloging. You don't know anything about collection development. You don't know this." And I'm going, "Do you want to give me a quiz on how much I know the gaming industry at this point?" I could go through the history of these games. I can tell you why we need certain things. And over time, I slowly, proved to them that, yes, I do know what I'm talking about. And yes, we can do this. And the collection will circulate. And anybody in Michigan, if your library system's part of the Michigan Electronic Library, our stuff circulates all across the state. I've sent stuff all the way into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at this point. And they were, we're here.
Yeah. My wife is from Michigan and my in-laws, so I'm well acquainted. But yes, we do need the hand. Yes. Okay.
Yes, you have to do the hand.
Yeah.
So I've sent stuff all over the state, and I still do. I mean, every couple of weeks, it's like, "Oh, look, I'm sending stuff," and I've sent them to other branches within our system. I've sent them to other systems in the state. And I think it kind of surprised a lot of people how well that circulates. And I'm very proud of that. The fact that, I was able to get that information out there, prove to people that this is valuable, and prove to game companies that it's valuable to get physical copies of your games into the library, because if people have a chance to look at it and like it, they're going to pick it up. They're going to buy copies.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think it's funny because you and I were talking about having lived through the Satanic Panic, which frankly was the origin of the CAR-PGA. The CAR-PGA was formed under Paul Caldwell for as a defense system to use basically, hopefully logic and research to sort of refute some of this. It's always fascinating now when you introduce it to students, and I kind of, cringe and be like, "What do you think of D?" And the parents are like, "Yeah, you mean the thing on Stranger Things or whatever the pop culture reference? Oh, Critical Role. I saw the cartoon." And so by the end of it, you're like, "Oh, right, okay, that's not the problem. The problem is, organization, all these other issues." I taught the game design merit badge for scouts for my scout troop, and it was the same thing. It was like they all knew it. They were like, "Yeah," and we've played D&D at campouts, right? So we were like, just to sort of keep the boys busy. But it's such a fascinating, change, because I still have that like, "Are you guys gonna be like, this is weird? What is it?" And everybody's like, "No, we're not. It's more, the resources and getting everybody together and all that stuff, which is its own challenge, right?" I think it's fantastic that you got the support that you did. I think, to your point, it does feel like we just don't do enough in terms of connecting sort of what's probably in a lot of ways an entrepreneurial sort of space, and getting them to acknowledge and understand that this is a huge opportunity. It's big picture. It's not necessarily selling a thing, but it's certainly branding and advertising to an audience that is very interested and motivated. And this may well be their first contact with a game that to create a great impression. So, I mean, some of that is like, did you feel like it, because I've seen it, I bumped into this with my library, where it's like, they sort of have it, they kind of do it, but they don't, it just doesn't, it feels like it's not as, I don't know if it's support. I think sometimes it's a combination of right audience with the right curriculum. We have an amazing escape room program, and it's pretty clear there's a librarian who's invested. Pretty sure we have an individual who is really good at this, and the escape rooms she's done, which are free, are better than ones that I've gone to professionally. And like, I'm just like, I can't believe the amount of work. And we learned things like, there was the one about the history of Connecticut that just blew me away, and you're learning as you're doing it. So it's clear some of this is passion that gets it sort of over the hump. But were you trying to fill a void that you felt from the library perspective, or was this the thing that you felt like just, like it's a natural, I mean, obviously to me, and I think to you, it seems like a natural fit. But what was the impetus to really push this? Because it takes work, right? This is not a small amount.
Oh yeah. Oh no.
To get you there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, today I spent an hour creating characters for the game I'm running tomorrow night for work, because I need extra characters just in case we have people walk in. So, you got to have the extra.
Of course.
I initially started it to fill a niche at our branch because we didn't have a lot of teen programming. We had tons of kids programming, tons of adult programming, very little for teens. I mean, we were trying to get, our youth services librarian was trying to get teens in to do like book groups where you talk about the books that you've been reading and eat pizza and chat. And that was going okay. And they tried doing like anime night, but we didn't really have anybody that was super into anime. So there were a couple gaffes there, but you need
be careful with anime.
Well. Yeah. But it was, it still went over pretty well, but I was like, this is a perfect niche for it, because it can be hard to find other kids to play, and it can be hard to find a place to play.
Yep.
So why not, for 2 hours on a weekend or a weeknight, we can do this, and, and the kids can find each other. And it worked really well. We actually had the teens that would come in and they would use our reading room on off weeks and run their own game back there. And the worst thing we had to do is go back and go, "Guys, volume." And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, sorry." Because they would get a little overexcited.
Yeah, of course.
But our friends at the library would come in on the weekends and they're like, "It was so nice seeing the teens back in there doing this." And that's how it started. And then when we went to our second branch, started doing it, they did an adult group. And that was once a month also. And then it's kind of expanded out of that. So we have my branch that is doing basically all ages. We just keep it age appropriate to the youngest member of the group. And then there's an adult group and a teen group at another branch. A third branch is doing virtual. and another branch is working on getting their actual programming. It's just a matter of having the staff that are ready.
Right.
And luckily, we do have quite a few staff now, so that if we need somebody to cover something for whatever reason, somebody's going on vacation or somebody changes position, there's a couple of us now that you can go, hey, I need somebody to cover, and we can get somebody out there. So there are several of us, and we all have we even have different interests in what games we prefer to run and play. So
Totally. Yeah, and to that point, I imagine it is in some ways, like I said, it's partially passion, it's partially customized to the individual. And then, hopefully it begins to grow as you get the players, obviously, but it is, there's not a small amount of emotional capital to put into this to get it going. And I think the rewards are humongous, but it is, you have to get there. And it does take, so you got to love the game, frankly, and the hobby. So, I'm just going to guess from the stuff behind you that you do. I'm just getting a vibe.
Just a little bit.
Just getting a vibe. So, one of the things I think that's fantastic, and this is frontline stuff, right? This is not sort of at a convention where you've got a built-in audience. This is not your own kids where you're like, oh, they got to listen to me, which I'm just projecting. But this is sort of a situation where you are talking about, strangers who don't necessarily know you or the game and the context, and you're trying to convince them. So that, I think, is incredibly valuable because it's real experience about what it takes to get someone to play a game. What has been your takeaways from doing this, right? So, some of it, there's probably, like I said, there's the Stranger Things crowd who is kind of curious. There's I saw, a streaming show. But what has been your takeaways in terms of how you introduce new players to this? Knowing, I imagine, the library's population is quite varied.
Oh, yes. We have a very diverse community here, which I love. And I love making sure that they know that we will represent all of them. We try to be I try to be very conscientious about making sure that we are representing all different parts of our community and that they're all welcome. And that anybody that's been curious about the hobby, I tell them, come on in. I will geek with you. We will talk. We will find you something for you to start with that's not going to have you going, what is all this? Print this big and tons of rules, and you're going, I don't know what to do.
I think Steve Jackson, he was like, yeah, only in role playing. Was it Steve? I'm trying to remember who said it. He was like, here is a rules manual. It's really fun though. Just read all the rules. You're like, you mean like the DMV? Like, why do I want to do this? Okay. Yeah. And by the way, the game lasts for like 9 months to years. Good luck. I hope it works out. But which is why we ask these questions, because in a lot of ways, if you take out the fun, which is hard to do because we obviously see the fun in it, it can be very daunting for new players.
So what I do is I invite them to come, like, if you're curious about how this works, come to one of our sessions. If you don't actually feel like actively playing, you can just sit off to the side and watch. That's totally fine. But you don't need to know anything. Literally, the only thing you need to show up with is yourself and your imagination. And that's all I care about. Because I can teach you rules.
Right.
I can explain what's going on. You just have to be willing to come in there and help write the story with the rest of our group. And I've run 20 game systems in the last 8 years for this. Wow. So I am not a person that's overly stuck on rules. I believe rule of cool reigns supreme. If it's a cool idea and they've got an idea of how they think they should be able to do it, then I'm like, as long as it doesn't break the game, sure, let's do it. It'll be fun. I can come up with something cool with this. Let me write down a little note in case there's repercussions, and we're all good to go. So I try to make it very welcoming for everybody, because, you're going to come at it from whatever, place you're at. You've seen it, you've watched Critical Role, or you've watched Big Bang Theory, or you've watched Stranger Things, whatever, or cartoons or whatever. And, I want to meet you where you're at and help you find where you want to start. I mean, we have everything from Tales of Equestria, which is the My Little Pony role-playing game, which I've had adults just love, because you can make a character in 5 minutes. I think the worst thing in character creation is coming up with a pony name that doesn't have a double entendre to it.
And they all do. So unfortunately, it's very challenging.
It's very challenging. That's the worst part of it. but it's a very simple game. It's very easy to get into, especially if you've got kids that want to try it and parents that are going, I don't know what I'm doing. Well, here, this is
Right.
really easy, and they have adventures built in, and they have all sorts of stuff. And all you have to do is have watched the show with your kids for a while, and you
Right.
can come up with ideas. We've got Dungeon Crawl Classics and GURPS too, and that's for all the people that really like the minutia of rules.
Right.
So I kind of drill down with people, what genre do you like? Are you somebody that really likes having a lot of structure, or are you okay with a little bit of structure and winging it on your own a bit? And that's how I figure out where they probably want to go. And I can point them to books we have in, or quick starts that are free online, and, a place to start. And so maybe some like YouTube shows that they can watch and get an idea of, this is how the game runs and this is what you do.
And I
So,
imagine that same skill set is frankly what you bring as a librarian
mhm.
to libraries, right? So you're asking, what do you want to read, or what are you interested in reading? I mean, some of these questions are in the same zone. I mean, obviously rules goes a little bit further, but the concept of what do you like, and let's meet you there, I think is huge, right? Because if you just sort of say, I like books, well, that's a very short conversation. And the sort of the world of fantasy and fiction and sci-fi, frankly, and any other, even be it historical reenactments or whatever you want to use as the sort of starting point, I think it's finding that hook and then taking it and showing how much more you can go with it, right? So look at all these books, all these possibilities that you could read. It's one of my favorite things to do is go deep on some topic that I'm not familiar with, because the game is the entry into that point, be it a moment in history or something. I think I'm not alone. I think a lot of geeks sort of they love that opportunity. And of course, gaming particularly is sort of multi arts, right? So you want to draw your character, you want to act out your character, you want to visualize you want to write a story about you. There's so many ways. You want to paint a miniature of your character, you want to 3D print it. There's
you want
so
to know
many.
what their weaponry looks like. I mean,
Right.
I've handed books out on medieval weaponry, and it's like, here, this is the thing you use. Here's a
I
picture.
love that. I love that. So do you see that? Do you see is there a ripple effect, I guess is the phrase, where you're like, oh, okay, so you want to talk about, and there's obviously limits based, I don't know, maybe you learn a lot about ponies if you like My Little Pony, but do you see those opportunities for the library in general versus just gaming?
Oh, definitely. What I tend to do a lot is, especially I did it with the teens a lot, was when we were doing certain types of games, I would bring in supplemental materials. So I'm one of those people that, while I adore maps, I am not very good at drawing them. So what I have a tendency to do is I will go out and find historical maps of places and then print them out, and then like change the place names and use other stuff. And so I'll bring old maps from like genealogy, like old maps of different countries and stuff, and say, look, you can use these, photocopy it, and just cover up the text and change it to whatever you want. Bring in stuff about weaponry or about history. We just got at GenCon, I got a copy of Nations and Cannons from Flag Bearer Games, and it's a Revolutionary War adaptation of D&D, and done really well.
Wow.
And so if people are into history, here you go. Use the D&D rules. Here's the adaptation, makes it work really nicely. And they've really thought about, how the Native Americans were treated and slavery in that time period. And they've actually had a sensitivity reader go through all of it. So I'm very comfortable handing this to families that are really big in history.
Yep.
Because they've thought about all these things already for us. So I'll hand history books. Playing My Little Pony gets kids going, hey, wait, haven't read this much. Well, here's a whole stack of books that are Tales of Equestria. Here are the videos. Here's the, whatever materials. Here's how to draw horses.
Right.
There's actual books on how to take care of horses and identifying different kinds. You can always find something to work with that gets them into other materials or different genres that they never thought they would read or look at.
Absolutely love that. Yeah, one of the campaigns the last campaign I ran for my kids was very much treating um, Dungeons and Dragons as sort of a Harry Potter style education
Mhm.
system, but teaching a lesson in the context of as they learned each new spell would be like, oh, so let's talk about the properties of fire, and let's talk about, starting, good sleep. You learn the sleep spell. Well, let's talk about the sleep cycles. And the idea was sort of to try and learn one thing every time, but then have the characters get some reward where they could use it later. And it was such a fun sort of experiment to see how far you can push this, and you can push it pretty far. Actually, it
Oh yeah.
turns out. It does depend on the student, or in my case, my children who are used to me. But it is I think a huge. It's limitless in terms of all the different topics and directions you can take it, and what better place than a library, which has so much of that available to do that. But you sort of offhandedly mentioned Gen Con. You've been busy at Gen Con. What have you been doing at Gen Con recently?
I was at Gen Con this year. I went to Trade Day and I did a presentation on libraries and role-playing games.
Hmm.
And it was about how to develop your collection, and how to start a club, and how to not be intimidated by running your first game. Because as my coworker who's the branch head at a different branch said, just tell people you will be terrified the first time you run a game. It's okay. Know you're terrified and just be willing to roll with whatever everybody does. Just make up stuff. It's okay. You don't have to follow the rules. Just have fun. And it gets easier every time you do it. You get less nervous about it and just roll with it. You're there to have fun. And if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Right. Which is really
So
the only thing you can screw up, right? Other than that, everybody should have fun. Rules, no rules, rules, schmules, and people
mhm,
are having fun and coming around the table. That's what keeps them coming back.
mhm.
I
And
screw up
then,
the rules all the time.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't worry about rules too much. And then, of course, the first day of Gen Con, I just lived in the vendor hall.
Of course.
I was there. It took me 5 hours to get all the way across, and I was
Yep.
talking to different companies. And I had a couple that were like, "Oh, you're with a library here. Have this. Oh, and you need this one too." And I'm like, lugging stuff around the
You're like, I
hall.
can't carry all this.
I'm like, I'm a
Yeah.
Sherpa.
I love that. So how was it received? I mean, is this the first time you've done this, or have you done it before?
I did an MLA presentation pre-Gen Con with a different coworker.
Hmm.
We did a combination of role-playing games and tabletop board games and card games. So we were talking about all of it. That one was, we had people sitting on the floor against the wall. We
Wow.
overfilled the room. They weren't expecting us to have quite so many people. Gen Con, I had a much smaller audience, but that's because apparently I ended up running into people as the day went on, and they were like, there were 6 things I wanted to see in the morning, and they were
Yeah.
all at the same time.
Yep.
But I
Yep.
left all my materials out, and people were picking those up that missed it. But it was well received, and I had a lot of questions, and I've been getting some emails and phone calls from people asking more questions and advice and things like that, which I'm always open to.
That's fantastic. And was it primarily for the attendees or the ones who are interested? Is it companies or other folks trying to launch it on their library or combination? What's the
I think
primary
I had
audience?
a combination of educators and librarians, but
Hmm.
I would have been happy if vendors had come in too, because I think I actually had one of our local game store people actually said I should contact Gamma and see if they would want me to come in to talk to vendors and publishers about why they should get copies of their product into libraries.
Absolutely.
Um, because some people think, oh, we don't want to donate that or whatever. And I'm thinking, have you been into a game store lately?
Hmm.
I have four role-playing game stores in our area, or comic book stores, and they carry D&D, Pathfinder, and maybe a couple other games that are popular in their store. And there are hundreds of role-playing games. If you want to get eyeballs on your game when they're not going to be on shelves and you can only find them online, give it to a library. If you give a copy to a library, especially one like ours where we can circulate it across our entire state, you get eyeballs on it. And if people really like it, they're going to go out and buy copies and want to see more stuff and support Kickstarters and all of that. And I think it's a huge asset for everybody. I mean, we get a copy so that we can circulate it and get it out to people. And it also sends people back to those vendors.
Totally. And I mean, to your point, it's probably the biggest challenge is the not D&D, right? So you're like, okay, I'm not D&D. That now, great. I'm glad that you're excited at D&D, and that's wonderful because we do feel like D&D, it does, when D&D does well, other games do well, but getting them off of D&D becomes really challenging. And to your point, partially because the market skews to exactly, the games people see or they have access to. So huge opportunity. So, all right. So you're a game publisher. I'm a game publisher. I have my own. What do I do to get that stuff in my local library? I mean, separate. I'd probably the first answer just go to your local library and ask. But if you were talking bigger picture and you're a mid-tier company, what would your advice be?
My advice would be definitely contact your local library system. Say, hey, I would like to donate some games to your library. Are you interested? Do you have a game program? If you don't have a game program, would you be willing to have one? Because we have some GMs that would be willing to come in and run some of our games, along with giving you copies that you can put in circulation. Give the resources to the library, and we're happy to get all the help we can. I mean, we're funded by tax dollars, and we make that go as far as we possibly can, but you've seen what's going on. It's the economy is not so great, but the library is a free resource for everybody. So if you can give us additional resources, we can do so much for the community.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this is one of those things too. So it's not just books, right? So I mean, I imagine it's the we were just mentioning this before we started, the range of things you can have to support gaming. Dice being the other obvious one.
Oh yeah.
But I imagine there's plenty of other things too people could donate that would help.
Oh yeah. I mean, dice are always a big one, but there are tons of free dice rollers online too. I've used several of them. But if you have very specialized dice, like Fantasy Flight, Star Wars, or the Genesis system, they use very specialized printed dice. If you've got those, donate those with the books. Like the big erasable hex maps, the sheets where you can put the write on them with the dry erase markers. Those are fantastic because some people really like having the maps out there available for use. Miniatures are great. Or some library systems do have 3D printers. They have maker spaces. If they've got those, you can just donate the files and they can print their own minis. I mean, anything you can think of, it's great. It's a help for us, and it people get a chance to get their hands on your product and see what they like about it.
That's amazing. I didn't even think about that to your point about the maker spaces. I know they have them, but you're right. The STL files, that's an infinite miniatures if it's the right ones that they need. So that's really exciting too. And to your point, I could easily see a company providing a package with everything you need, be it printable or dice or whatever, in hopefully a fairly portable fashion. To libraries. I think that'd be fantastic. Is this sort of a cross-coordinated effort? Is it really always grassroots, or how would you, if scaling this up, right? So now you're talking about like, where do you go? I don't know where to go. I don't know my local library. I'm new to town. What do I do?
Well, okay, new to town. Of course, always the first thing, go to the library, get a library card.
Find the library, yeah.
Find the library. I mean, I started all this just one person going, hey, I want to do this. And that's how a lot of libraries are starting it, is one person goes, but this is my hobby and this would be really cool. And they finally convince somebody to let them do this. If you're a librarian, of course, reach out to game companies. A lot of them are fantastic about donations. I mean, you talked about Steve Jackson. You write Steve Jackson games and say, hey, I'm from a library. Could I get X? And they're like, all right. And they send you a box of stuff. And I left because when we started this, they sent me the 2 main GURPS books. Well, at some point they vanished from our library. I don't know if they just walked out or what, but so I sent them a note probably about 6 years on and went, I'm not sure what happened. I didn't see the luggage come through because, of course, I had to make a Discworld reference because they have a Discworld game.
Of course.
So I'm thinking maybe if they're really kind, they'll send me the 2 main GURPS books and maybe Discworld. I get a box like this. My boss comes in and goes, "You're opening that right now in front of me because I have no idea what that is." I'm like, I was expecting maybe 3 books. I open it up. I had the Kickstarter boxes from Dungeon Fantasy and the Fantasy Trip, plus the separate books that were inserted so we could put those into circulation. So we had all the hexes and minis and all of that, and the 2 GURPS books, and the Discworld book, and dice, and some other stuff. I mean, it was just, and she's going, "You're kidding." I'm like, this is what Steve Jackson Games is like. This is what they do, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, they're amazing.
But lots of other companies have donated stuff. I mean, I've got to contact Peso because I talked to somebody when I was at GenCon, and he's like, "Contact me after GenCon because we're going to talk to you about maybe getting you some of the new stuff from the new edition of Pathfinder because we didn't have any."
Yep.
You know, lots of companies. Kenzer and Company, they're really friendly. Lots of companies, and some because they're headquartered, you know, in other countries. Sometimes they don't really want to do the whole send you physical, so they'll send you PDFs that your staff can use.
Right.
So like we have Modifius, we did play testing for them for Star Trek Adventures, and then after that I said, could we get some of this so we can use it? And they said, well, you know, the shipping expenses is prohibitive. Could we just send you PDFs? And I'm like, yes, because we can use those. So we have all these on our staff intranet, so only our staff has access to them. Right. But that means we can still run a Star Trek Adventures game for our players, and they can see what it's like. And if they like it, they can still go out and get it on their own.
That's amazing. And I am fond of saying this. I was like, if you know where to look, and I'm not talking about pirating, just to be clear when I say this, there you could play for years just with this stuff on the internet. And I don't even mean like, you know, like there's quick starts, there's people who offer their own free adventures, there's people just trying new things, and it's out there. There's free stuff. Yeah, free RPG. So there's just so much out there. It's more the will and frankly sorting through it all in a way that you know doesn't take up all your time because you got to do other stuff. But I think the possibilities are really enormous, and you know, libraries, I'm sure, have learned to be scrappy enough to figure that out, which is sort of, you know, grassroots efforts where you say, well, let me see what I can do for free, and it is a lot. Now, which is kind of amazing how much content there is, because there's almost everything. It's just a question of, do you need to adapt it to a certain rule set or whatever, but it's all out there at this point. So I think that's fantastic. And, you know, again, libraries are sort of at the forefront of trends, right? So, you know, where the population goes, that's where the libraries are going, because that's the people that you're catering to, and that's people who come into the library, hopefully. So, I think, you know, it's all positive because it shows sort of the population's tolerance and interest. And it sounds like you have no shortage of people sort of coming around to this idea, partially because we're having a moment, right? So who was, maybe I don't want to keep quoting Steve, but he says, I'm like, we won. Like, what does that mean? We won. Congratulations. Like, what did we win? Like, what? But it's sort of, that's not our battle, right? So the battle no longer, unfortunately, is trying to convince people to play. It's really now looking inward or looking outward and saying, as you mentioned, are we being sensitive enough? Are we doing it in a way that you learn? Are we making sure we're not reinforcing harmful tropes? You know, we had some of the game designers on Coyote and Crow, which is,
you know, I have my copy sitting right over here.
Yeah, and they're awesome. But it is one of those things where we're like, we've got to sort of think about the umbrella as being much wider than it was in the past, so that we can really, truly, and certainly the CAR-PGA has pivoted. You know, for me, that was huge, which is we're not going to, not that it's not important to say, you know, gaming is please don't think of it negative. Our bigger challenge is us now, right? The gamers who are already here and saying, we got to look at ourselves and say, are we doing the right things? Are we being as welcoming as possible? Are we ensuring that maybe we need to relook at some of the things that we did in the past and make sure there's opportunities. And I think libraries are easily at the forefront of that opportunity to really make sure it's diverse and sensitive and inclusive.
Yeah, I made sure the Fate Accessibility Toolkit, I loved that when that came out, because it really struck a chord with me, because all the articles on the different disabilities, whether they be physical or mental disabilities, the articles are written by people with that disability.
Right.
So this is what it's like living with this, and this is how you can safely include this in your game and make sure that it's represented properly, whether it's an NPC or somebody who wants to play somebody like themselves.
Right.
And Coyote and Crow, I mean, that's another perfect example of something written by a people to represent them properly, so that people understand, whether they're from that culture or not, they understand what's going on in that culture, and it's represented appropriately. I made sure we purchased our copy of that for the system, because I wanted to be sure we supported their work, because they were donating to libraries, and I'm like,
I remember that.
No.
Yeah.
And I said, no, we're buying a copy, because our system can afford to buy this, so we can support them, and then and hopefully help continue on what they're doing. And because Michigan has a lot of different tribal nations.
Yeah.
And I am talking with some of our leadership and checking to see if we can do something maybe with some of the Native American communities in our area and Coyote and Crow, and see if we can work out something with that to bring more awareness to the tribes within the state.
That's fantastic. And again, libraries are uniquely suited to do that, right? So I think there's definitely groups that want to do that, but libraries can be at the forefront. We see this has been going on. We've been talking about it to different youth groups about the mascot controversies, which shouldn't be controversies, but they are, unfortunately, and how much it's important to have the local peoples and their history's voice, and not just a bunch of people yelling at each other about what they're used to having. And I think libraries can absolutely do that. And Coyote and Crow is a fantastic opportunity to start that dialogue. So that's really exciting.
Yeah.
I want to be sensitive to our time. What's next for you? So this is amazing. I mean, you're at the forefront of this thing. I think it's going to you're going to get more popular, not less. What's next for you in this world domination of libraries and role playing?
Just kind of continue what we're doing. I mean, I'm continuing to making sure that our collection stays diverse. I'm looking for, I can't wait. I got to find when Into the Motherlands is coming out, so that we can purchase a copy of that, because I just love the idea of Mansa Muso people colonizing an alien planet. I just find that whole concept fascinating, and the fact that the whole thing was written by people of African descent. I want that. I want that available to our community. I'm looking for a good Asian representational game, so that we have that, because we have a very diverse community. I mean, we've got a major university in our area, and we've got lots of people from all over the place in our area. And I want to be sure that they all can see themselves somehow in our collection and in things that are available to them. So I want to continue that. I would be happy to go to any convention and give a presentation again.
Yeah.
I had a great time at GenCon. Everybody was so wonderful there.
And you have a blog, right?
I do write for the American Library Association's Gamer Roundtable. I write Confessions of an RPG Nerd. I just have to do a little more formatting, and I have a new blog post coming soon. I think I've got like 8 or 10 of them out there. Then it covers everything from what is a role-playing game all the way to things about inclusion and stuff like that. My next one is it's going to be about ROLL playing versus ROLE playing, and how different systems support that or not, and comparing systems from when I started playing to systems I use now. So I do that.
What can the there's a lot of librarians in our membership. What can we do to support you today? Besides this, besides what's happening right now, besides this.
Well, I do more stuff with the ALA Gamers Roundtable. So they have Discords, one for the general games, and then they have one for role-playing games also. And I do mentor there. So, yeah, I've run one game so far. I just have to get a consensus on what people want. So I actually do run games for librarians so they can learn a little bit about different systems, how the mechanics work, how to run it, and they can ask questions and try out things. So, join those, learn about it, ask questions. I mean, if you are at all curious about any of this, go out, ask questions. There are plenty of people like myself who are out there going, hey, you don't get it? I got stuff.
Right.
I can help.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes it's just connecting the right people, right? It's not the enthusiasm's there. It's finding the right places and making sure people connect to be it from donating, which I think is a huge opportunity. Certainly donations are huge, to education. Like you said, the role versus role playing, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And really just bringing libraries into the conversation when we talk about gaming as a cultural phenomenon, right? So it's not just like, I guess we're so used to books being a cultural phenomenon. It's not something you mention anymore, but sometimes, like, I know Gary Gygax used to be like, yeah, we invented a new game. Like there wasn't like role playing in the same way until the 70s. And now he's like, so it's new comparative. It's not like, oh, I've heard of card games, although I guess Magic sort of put a little bit of a spin on that. But, this is still a relatively new medium that it's clear we're all learning, and potentially hasn't hit its full potential. I think that's one of the things that's clear is that you keep going, oh, what about this? And I also think one of the things that, certainly you're seeing is when you've got branded things, or you've got even genres like Afrofuturism, that's an entry into fiction, right? So it's not just playing the game. It's like, do you look at these books in the library? Or, hey, you like My Little Pony? There's all these My Little Pony comics and manga and other opportunities, just to get kids reading and engaging. So I think it's massive. I would argue it's always been there. But it's been sort of a little hidden. I was laughing because at one point you could probably, every cartoon has a role-playing game episode, every one of them. My Little Pony has at least 3, because my family watched My Little Pony from beginning to end till we haven't watched the new series. But so it's fascinating because it's there.
Oh yeah.
It was just and it was surprising how long it took before there was an official game, right? They had ogres and oublies or whatever they called it, and it was they kept changing the name between the comic and the cartoon. So it took a while before it actually manifested, but that's starting to speed up. Now we got the Avatar role-playing game. We're starting to see faster and faster these licenses, and I think in some ways where people think of it finally as a role-playing game too. I always say that you have these setting Bibles for movies and stuff, and they already did the research. That's, as a role player, that's the first. I go, wow, man, I just want the book. I don't even care about your movie. Just give me the setting guide, because I love the world and the universe that you're coming up with. So I think that's going to accelerate, and certainly at this point, gaming it's behind the scene. Well, frankly, half the folks have grown up and are now influencing art. So half of them are either not, or either admitting it, or sometimes they're not, depending on what cultures they're in, as to how much role playing influenced them. And the ones that are admitting that, I think, are now putting it front and center. The D&D movie, hopefully good, is right around the corner. The documentary, who I just mentioned, official, which is big news from Hasbro to throw their weight behind it. We're at a turning point.
Oh yeah.
I hope it helps. I feel like this is going to be probably in the next year. We're coming out of COVID. Things are going to be interesting for sure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the game I'm running tomorrow night, I have 8 people that made characters, and I have to have extras because we might have more people showing up. So I'm running these monster games now. And I love the fact that I'm seeing all ages and parents coming in and going, hey, wait, there's a game for this? And I'm like, oh yeah, but what about this? Oh wait, we're getting that one. And like, Avatar, I'm very excited about Avatar Legends. I'm waiting for my nice large box of everything to show up. And well, the Monty Python role-playing game that's now in Kickstarter, which if I brought that in and displayed it, I would have like so many of our members going, Monty Python, and laughing their heads off.
What I really want is that you have to have every librarian be, because you can fire the narrator, right? So then you have to pick a new role. So just like line up everybody and they have to take a shot once you get fired on your, when you're no longer allowed to be game master, whatever they call it. It's very exciting.
Oh yeah. Hand over the sash.
That's right. I love it.
Oh yeah. I remember I guested, I was on a panel at Clinton Macomb Library's Comic-Con when they did it virtually. And I was chatting with them and I said, I can come up with, name your genre, name what you want. I can find you a game system for it. And she goes, okay, Magical Girl. And I went, do you want it very straight up anime? Do you want something more fantasy? Or do you want something more superhero or modern? And she went, wait, I have choices. I'm like, oh yes, you have lots of choices.
Oh yeah.
And she was stunned because I was like, well, this would be advantage this way, and this would be advantage. She's like, whoa.
That's so funny. Yeah, and it is one of those things, like I said, gaming, the gaming industry is now starting to reflect the bigger, broader pop cultures. The more popular it becomes, the easier it always did. It was always on the internet, may not have been official, right? So now we're also changing game systems to match the genres better. So it's not just play D&D and then try and wedge stuff in. It's sort of these game systems flexing to tell different kinds of stories, which I think is amazing. I think you're going to need help, Christine. I think there's a tsunami of gaming coming your way in probably a year or so, that I suspect is going to get even bigger. So you're going to be running the place soon. That's my guess. I think people are going to be coming to you and go like, what do we do now? I don't.
You know, I am always happy to bring more people into the fold. This has been my favorite hobby since I started, and you know, I get to do this as part of my job. I mean, COVID hit, we shut down, and I'm like, and I have a box from R.L. Sorian that I get to read, and I get to count that as work.
Yeah, right. That's amazing.
My friends are like, but one of my favorite local authors was like, wait a minute, because he was listening to the conversation I was having in line coming up to get my book signed. He's one of my favorite authors. And he's like, wait, so I hear you get to read role-playing game books and run or play games as part of your job. And I'm like, He's like, that's so cool.
Yes. And it's becoming more and more common that you can usually, somebody finds a way to sort of incorporate it one way or the other, but I think that's fantastic. And it is one of those things that I think it's going to become more common. You're going to see people more and more being like, yeah. So I actually, at one point during my day job, they almost sent me to Comic-Con to recruit. And I was like, I'm your guy. And they said, we thought of you, you know. I was like, please send me. It didn't work out. But the geeks are inheriting the earth for sure. And I think more and more we're starting to realize that we're finding each other, which is the best thing it's the best thing a library can do, is sort of find your people.
Exactly. I mean, there's something for everybody at the library, and you know, I love being part of connecting people and getting them into something that they would never have thought of trying on their own, and they find out that it's not as weird as they thought it was going to be. Yeah. And that they really enjoy it. And
you're the Michigan, is it all of Michigan, or what is the?
I am Capital Area District Libraries. We cover all of Ingham County except East Lansing, because they're do some stuff with Michigan State University. Right. And so that's just our district, and that's 13 branches. And then we're also part of what's called the Michigan Electronic Library, which means we circulate to member libraries all across the state. So, you know, I've circulated things to, you know, as close as Ann Arbor and stuff up to Iron Mountain. So
awesome.
You know, we can send these, if your library system in Michigan is part of the Michigan Electronic Library, you can request it. We can send it off. It'll be there in 7 to 10 days.
That's awesome. Yeah, I visit my in-laws. I went to Michigan State, as did my wife, and we were in East Lansing. So I'm out there once a year. So I'm gonna have to try and drop by and say hi, and it'll be amazing.
Come on down to Mason.
Yeah, that'd be exciting. Well, I think that's our time. Is there anything else you wanted to share? Any websites? And we will certainly put it in the newsletter. Is there anything?
games.ala.org. That's
Mm-hmm.
the Gamer Roundtable.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got all the information on there if you want to join the Discords. There's, like I said, there's two. There's the regular, and then there's the one specifically for role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
And then my blog posts are out there. I don't post on a super regular basis, but I do that. And then on my own time, I stream Elder Scrolls Online and some other stuff under the name SteenGeek01. So
is that on Twitch or where are you?
Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Steen, STEEN, Geek01. And I talk role-playing games and nerdy things, nerdy TV, comic books, all of that while I'm playing. So I'm willing to drop my game as long as I'm not in the middle of combat. I'm willing to drop my game and stop and go, oh, you have a question about a game system. Let me go pull it off the shelf. Let's talk. So I'm totally willing to do that during my streams. So
that's awesome. That's fantastic. So yeah, what we'll do is I'll double check because I'm not gonna get this right. I'm sure I want you to write it down and we'll put that in our newsletter. And we put it in the YouTube comments, the description section as well. So we'll make sure we get all your links. Is there any social links besides that? Obviously, you said Twitch. Is there any Twitter or Facebooks, anything like that? Or
not at this point.
Okay.
I'm still a baby streamer. So
okay, that's totally fine. That's fine. But yeah, so look, I can only say good things. I think you are on the cutting edge in a lot of ways of what the future is, which is we've just got to get gaming to more people where they're at.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means not paying for it, frankly. And sometimes that means being physically capable to find a group. Because part of the challenge, I think, that we all struggle with, adults and kids, is just finding your people to play with. Exactly. And libraries are perfect for that. So this is I think it makes perfect sense. We just got to get everybody on board, and I have no doubt it's going to get only more. So I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you so much. Stick around. I will stop the recording. Don't leave. But yes, thank you for coming. And we want to our membership. What we'll do is we will make sure we circulate this and absolutely engage. And I think I've made a note because I don't know why I didn't think of this, but there's definitely things I'm going to be donating to my local library as a hint. It's going to be my passive aggressive, like, hey guys, here's some of the stuff that I've produced. Put it in the library, and I'd love to share it, talk about it, at least get it into people's hands. I don't care. So I think it's a great opportunity for any small producer or designer to get their own audience. It absolutely is the right thing to do. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
We'll be talking for more. Thank you.